audience? We got to get them here, right?
There's a station 2 blocks down.
And we invited. We did invite. Offered free tickets.
My brother's a firefighter about 8 blocks away, but he's on medical leave right now. So those guys come on Saturday, on Wednesday actually.
Well, there's one more screening on Wednesday, so please spread the word to all your firefighter friends. This gives you an excuse to speak to your local firefighters, right? That's what we're always looking for. Thank you guys so much for being here, and thank you for a wonderful film. And I think there's a lot to talk about in this film. Let's start from where it started for you and how you got involved with this project, when you started working on it, and how each of you got involved.
Sure. I guess I'll introduce myself. I'm Avi Goldstein, and I work with David and the rest of the folks who saw the credits on this film. I had moved back. I was born in Israel, and I grew up in the U.S. in St. Louis, Missouri, and had started a career in corporate business consulting for 5 years, and decided that it was time to move back for about a year or two to get my Hebrew back and reconnect with the place. And what I found when I got there is that there was a lot I didn't know about, and I found myself continuing to travel and explore. I made a first short film in 2009 that then opened up some other opportunities, which then eventually led to an invitation to consult and work on a project at the Mahan Network in Bethlehem, which is an independent Palestinian media organization. This was not what I was expecting when I moved to Jerusalem in 2007, a couple of years later. And I found myself there in a group, along with David, and he can describe how he got there. In early 2011, reviewing recent events and coming together, and David, who can talk about his background, put forward that his brother is a New York firefighter, and he actually knew a lot more about this event than I had. I was living in Jerusalem. I knew it had happened, had read about it, knew about the tragedy of the bus, the 44 who had died, knew about the police officer, knew about the headlines, but actually wasn't aware of this story. With the highlight, understandably, of the national tragedy, this had become, it was covered, but it was a relatively marginal story. But David in New York, through the connections in the firefighter community, as I discovered, and as you hear these guys talking about, it truly is a global brotherhood. So here in New York, they knew much more about the details of who had come, from where, with what gear, and the fact that there were these 3 trucks that had come. But that's all we knew. And so we decided together with the group that was there together with different backgrounds and connections to set off on a trip to go hear directly from the firefighters. What happened? Why did you go? What went on? And try to put together an account of what had happened. And this was in early 2011 when we interviewed them, so it's still pretty fresh.
Yeah, and I think that through the course of I think that through the course of speaking with all the different firefighters, both in Palestine and in up near Haifa, we discovered a whole lot more than just, I think, the bare bones of the story that we were looking for. And that's how a lot of things came into it. We had to be very selective even in terms of what made it into the film, because so many different subjects came up. Cooperation in the West Bank, cooperation in Israel proper, and normalization, and what were the reasons why these firefighters wanted to cooperate and go lend a hand. And some of them obviously come from that inherent firefighter or the first responder, really, baseline morality. And some of it was even more specific to some of the firefighters who went. You hear some of them talking about, the fact that they regard Haifa still as an Arab city. So there was so much going on, but the more that we went through all of these interviews, that it really became, I think, the story touched on so many different topics that are inherent to all the things that have been talked about, these past 4 days here. And we try to get as much of that into the film without staying true to the story itself. If that makes sense.
Were there any complicated sides as far as making a film both with an Israeli side? And it seems that it's very complicated sometimes to do things both in the Palestinian Authority and in Israel proper, and working on both sides. How complicated was that?
I think that we lucked out. Avi speaks Hebrew, so he was able to connect and to communicate with a lot of the Israeli authorities. That I'm not Israeli, I'm not Jewish. And I'm not Arab, so it was hard for me to communicate with almost anybody directly. So I'll be...
Even with me in English, sometimes.
Yeah, people still understand what I'm talking about in English. And we have a lot of very important Palestinian partners who are not on the stage here right now, but who were not just instrumental, but absolutely essential in making this film. Who conducted the interviews in Arabic with those Palestinian firefighters, and who also served as entry points an American showing up there with a clean shaven and short hair, they automatically are pretty suspect of me. And obviously speaking Hebrew with a name like Avi Goldstein, hanging out in Jenin is pretty suspect as well. So we were able to sort of I think between all of us come together and really sort of prove the more we started talking to these firefighters and to the leaders of these firefighters that we didn't have an agenda other than to be honest brokers of the story. And the more firefighters we spoke to, it's a pretty tight community. The more we spoke to, the more word spread about the fact that we're out there trying to get the story, and that we were honest and unbiased, and that we were worth talking to. That some of the other firefighters who were involved became more and more open to speaking with us. So it kind of snowballed, and I think that it came down to myself and Avi being involved, and certainly having the entry point from MAN and our Palestinian partners was absolutely essential in telling the story.
Yeah, I won't say much, but I'll second that last point and make that point that without the MAN network, the film wouldn't exist. They had pre-existing relationships as a long-standing and respected media organization where they know the firefighters. They work with them on weekly news, whether it's a small fire or major events. And so being able to have that credibility really opened up those doors. And they're not here on the stage, but the film wouldn't exist without their participation in production.
Have you shown the film to the firefighters from both sides?
I've shown it, well, first of all, it's screened at broadcast. The MAN network, which is a TV and satellite station, has broadcast this. So it's broadcast in the West Bank, Gaza, and the Middle East, and they serve an Arabic-speaking audience. It also broadcasts to satellite. It also broadcasts in Israel. So actually some of the Israeli Druze firefighters who watch Arabic saw it on MAN first, because they tune into Arabic stations and saw themselves. We've done screenings. Going back to the actual production, we found these guys very, very interested in talking. They wanted this story to get out there. They were, hopeful that people would see this. We actually found it surprisingly easy to start the conversation. And I did a screening recently in Jerusalem with Shimon Bamach, who's the former chief of Israel Fire and Rescue. And he became a real ally and advocate, and it was very important to have the top of the whole the whole service. And as you saw, for him, it was a profession, it was a career, but he also, his relationship with Ahmed Rizek goes back also years. They had forged a real personal, professional working relationship. This was not the first time that Ahmed Rizek had picked up the phone to Shimon Ramach. So, Shimon became a really close ally and has participated in a few screenings where he's also been able, I wish he were here, because he can also pull back the curtain and give you a lot of the backstory. And there's a lot of backstory to the day-to-day work that they've done together, both on actual firefighting as well as in capacity building, skill building, development, training. There's a whole other conversation we could have about what they've done as well as some of the challenges. It hasn't all been easy. Their politics have come into it and gotten in the way of certain initiatives that they were trying to kind of grow behind the scenes. So.
Before we open it to questions from the audience, I just wanted to comment that I find this film, one of the wonderful things about this film is that it really humanizes both sides, that both sides have such walls up as far as the fear of the other side and issues of how the other side treats the others. And you see at the end all the politics and how they treat one another. Oh, you're not letting all our people come, we're all not going. And I think it brings to light that these are people on both sides, and no side, each side I'm sure sees the other side as a little sometimes less than people, less than human, and I think this film does a good job in showing that really both sides are equally human.
Well, I think just to throw it out there, because I've heard the word side a lot. When we talk about politics at this festival and other places, people talk about my side, your side, their side. Oh, what's interesting and really compelling to me is that these guys are actually on a kind of third side. They're in this cross-cutting, values-driven community that almost can look at the physics of our political world and say, wait, I've got a different set of rules. But these guys are on my side too, and frankly, you're all, when I'm on this job, we're all on one side. So I think the notion of sides also gets played with once you get into that lens of the values-driven way of looking, whether it's a firefighter or a first responder. I think there's something that I certainly learned from these guys about that.
We're happy to take your questions. There's someone up there.
Have you ever considered doing the same kind of study and doing the same kind of work with the medical community? Because there's a lot of cooperation. I know there's Médecins Sans Frontières, which is all over Africa, but I'm sure that in Israel, they treat a lot of Palestinians, from what I just vaguely hear from news. But there isn't any exposure. I think that people who do the work of rescuing humanity should get many, many more documentaries and many more movies and a lot more exposure, like you can do.
Yeah, thank you for that. That's actually why I try and break out, when I answer that, that's why I try and break it out and not just say firefighters, because the entire first responder, the entire medical community, I think that all of them could be included in this conversation. And you hear about Palestinian victims even after the Gaza war being treated in Israel proper. This story presented itself to us when we were looking for a story to tell, and because of my own personal family connections, I found it an easy way for us to articulate what we were trying to say. It certainly isn't meant to say that this is the only way, this is the only place cooperation happens. The cooperation happens across the board in other places that are not discussed as much as it should be, as you were saying.
Michael, what are the names? There are two films that we were talking about before. One was called Jerusalem SOS, which is a short. What was the longer format? There was another film that you said was made.
The longer film was actually an Al Jazeera about the medical work.
Do you remember what it was?
It was a broadcast. I don't remember the name of it, but I can go back.
So there have been, we were just talking about exactly that topic before, that other people have made at least two, and there are probably more films about first responder, and there should be one a day. I agree with you. There's a limit to what we can offer, but absolutely.
And thank you for plugging our partners, United Hatzalah, that are doing that in different ways and are having films made about it. So you can maybe find out more from Michael.
Thank you. I wonder if you're able to determine what the cause was for the firefighter being rejected at the end. You seem to not have any idea or claim he didn't. He said he was in jail, his brother, and apparently wasn't the first time. Are you able to get behind that? Something doesn't compute.
There's never really any, you don't really get an answer why you get rejected, you just don't get it. The fact that his brother was in jail, and many of these guys have been in jail through the first and second intifada for what myriad reasons. It could have literally been just that, and frankly, from the anecdotal stories that I've heard, if your brother was in jail for whatever reason during one of the intifadas, pretty good chance you're not going to get a permit.
Yeah. But we intentionally left it ambiguous. Yeah. It is ambiguous. We never got a straight answer. We got 2-3 versions, and frankly, they never got a straight answer.
You made an attempt, but you couldn't get a straight answer.
Well, we didn't even. At some point, we gave up because, in terms of the narrative and their experience, it doesn't matter. You know, they went hoping they'd get in. They didn't get it. You know, they had gotten in just previously, despite whatever prevented it. So why do these rules all of a sudden apply now? We didn't want to. It wasn't an investigative journalism.
I wouldn't even say they were hoping to get in. They drove to the checkpoint that morning expecting to get in because they had just been there several days earlier.
And I can tell you that constantly, this is a constant battle, so to speak, of trying to get these permits and being rejected without knowing, and it turns into, I mean, you really need a lot of connection sometimes to be able to...
Not all walls are made out of concrete, you know. Some walls are just bureaucratic, and the walls between societies. I mean, today's the 25th anniversary of the Berlin Wall coming down, you know, and I think it says a lot. You know, not all walls are made of concrete, and I think the walls that have been built between communities are sometimes just as bureaucratic as that, and you're lucky if you get an answer.
That's why we chose the screens.
I want to thank you for the film. It was very poignant.
Thank you.
I have a question about the footage, since you came in after the fact.
Absolutely.
So some of the footage of them actually fighting the fire came from somewhere else. I'm curious about that.
Well, all of it. All of the footage of the fire.
But of the Palestinian
So
firefighters themselves.
Yeah, so that was a challenge, both technically and storytelling-wise. You know, we're talking to them in February, March, April, May of 2011, the fire had happened. So, we shot the sit-down interviews with them at the stations. How do you bring that to life? During the course of the interviews, we found some primary footage that they had taken. The very grainy, pixelated stuff was cell phone footage from the firefighters themselves. They pulled out their little Nokia phones or whatever they had, or iPhones, and took some footage, and that's the stuff that you see of them right in the moment. Some of it is news footage. Them crossing the checkpoint was Israeli footage from Channel 2. Stuff at the fire was Channel 10, and we did a massive archival research. Stuff came from AP, ITN, Reuters, and we pieced it together, which also explains sometimes some of the jumps in the footage. We tried to smooth it out, but we actually really had to reconstruct, both through their footage, photographs, and then other sources of the story to describe what they're telling.
It's sort of the same challenge you have, I think, making any documentary as opposed to news piece when you're actually there capturing it, but after the fact trying to piece together a story. And I got to plug State Department for that. If it wasn't for State Department coming in, U.S. State Department coming in and allowing us a budget to actually license all that archive material, again, we wouldn't be here today. So, thanks to them as well as Search for Common Ground and as well as Mon.
While we're on and we're plugging Search for Common Ground, who helped also promote the screening, what was their involvement? Can you tell us a little bit more about how they connected to the project?
Sure. They're a long-standing partner of the Mon Network as well. They've been working together for a long time. And so we started off this trip, David and I working directly with the Mon Network. We filmed the interviews. And as David described, we were at a point where all of a sudden we had this archival budget in front of us. We had a lot of finishing costs, and we were looking for additional partners to help us get across the finish line and actually get the film out. And so they stepped in two ways. They first of all stepped in to help us connect with a State Department agency that provided the funding. It's an agency that works with firefighters and training, and they were able to provide us some budget to get that finishing funds. And now they're also a partner, given their experience and relationships on outreach and engagement, help putting together a facilitation guide. We've done a lot of home screenings and community screenings with Palestinian as well as Israeli audiences, from schools and community centers to people's homes and on the floor at the American consulate, down to someone's home in Baka or in Anata, and they've really been driving that community outreach and trying to connect with other partners to get the film out at a really grassroots level.
I think that the film tells a really interesting story that is undertold, but I think within the communities that it directly impacts, it also opens up a lot of avenues for conversation, and I think that Search both saw the potential for that and has been taking advantage of that.
As a former communications director of Search for Common Ground, I was very, very proud to see their imprimatur on this. And I can just say that this is a classic example of the kind of work that Search does, bringing together people normally in conflict and finding common ground for them to work together. So I congratulate you on your relationship with them. I have a question that's sort of outside the scope of this film, but I'm wondering if you can tell us what's happened to the Carmel forest in the last 3 years. To what extent has it recovered, or is it still pretty much a fire scene?
I need to get better versed in that because it is outside the scope. After this film, I've started chasing other things. I can say, I'll say what I know, and I won't try to give you a comprehensive answer because I'm not fully briefed. I think there were a few things that came out of the fire that I saw. One was actually a shift in policy and attitude that the JNF specifically and others embraced. Up until that point, the ideal was plant, 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 plant. Raise money and plant trees, and that became a very symbolic and wide-reaching way of participating. And actually saw, actually our job is, in general, natural ecological relationships is about preservation. And so there's been a policy shift of sometimes actually thinning forests rather than planting. There were some mistakes that were made in terms of how the forest was planted and taken care of. So that's a big change. It's going through a cycle of reforestation. It takes time.
But Carmel is, in general, considerably more dense than it was several generations ago. So there are a bunch of people we talked to in Forest Services that were not surprised at all by the fire happening or by the cyclical nature of these, because it might actually be overplanted at this point. So there's a lot going on there.
Part of the problem is the nature of the species of trees.
That's right.
Yeah, that's a whole big conversation.
There's a whole other thing, and I think that's also been, in terms of policy and relationship, for a variety of reasons, also beyond the scope of the film, there was a trend to plant certain kinds of pines, Aleppo pines and other pines, which aren't indigenous. They're easy to plant, they grow fast, but they're also incredibly flammable. They essentially work like gunpowder. If when one lights on fire, it spreads, and not only do they spread, their pine cones explode and scatter embers, which is a problem during the fire, and then it's also a problem in the reconstruction and regrowth phase, because now you've actually, every single pine tree that died, it's like, what was that story? The wizard and the brooms. Every time you slap one broom, there's 5, and now so for every pine that was burnt, you potentially have dozens of seeds planting coming back up. So there is a challenge, I think, in really addressing some of the underlying causes of how to manage and tend to forests that are dense and very, very close. This isn't Arizona, it's not California.
And
this is really on top of residential communities, right on top of Haifa, and people are living right there, so you can't just let it burn, which is a very common approach to fire elsewhere. You have to step in, people do risk their lives regularly to control and then suppress a fire that in another place maybe the approach would be let it go.
And there are politics inherent even in that we won't even bother getting into right now, just in terms of why it's overplanted and debates on why and how it should be. Like everything else, it's also loaded.
And I'll add one more thing that came out of this fire. The Israeli Fire Department program also instituted an aerial unit now that puts out fires with airplanes.
Yeah.
If I understood correctly, it sounds like you guys were working for a Palestinian media organization. That's how you met. Can you talk a little bit about what that was like?
Like everything else, it created some opportunities and some challenges. Thankfully, most of our partners at the organization spoke English, and my Arabic is poor, not as good as it was their English. But every day, I think it was more challenging, frankly, for Avi, a guy named Avi Goldstein, traversing every day into the West Bank to go to work. I was just I could just be looked at as another American aid worker. But it created obviously a great opportunity because it gave us the opportunity to tell this story. It also created challenges, and it had its own inherent challenges. It was an experience.
Yeah, for me it was actually I see Charlotte here who worked with us at MON. It was really surprising and inspiring. I didn't come when I moved to Jerusalem. After the previous year having a day-to-day commute on the Green Line in Boston to work downtown, I didn't expect my commute to turn into a daily commute into Bethlehem. And given the various identities that I carry, on the one hand, I had a lot of privilege being able to navigate the reality of the West Bank and checkpoints, where I'm American, I can go places that other people living there can't at all, let alone easily. So that was a kind of daily reminder, I'm crossing these valves that exist between Israel and the West Bank, and then internal valves. It's a kind of whole maze, and you learn the patterns of where kind of your specific identity and privilege or lack of privilege can take you and not take you. And so I was able to go into Bethlehem through a certain route. I'd go there and work there, and it was a surprise, to find myself on the instant messaging list. There's Avi Goldstein on the list, and it's a very warm and very familial kind of organization. And people who work there really care about what they do. They believe in what they do. They believe in the value of independent media and the value of having a voice, and they believed in the power of this film and wanted. I remember I was sitting with Riley Hoffman, who's the director of the organization, and before heading off, he was like, take this movie. I want people to see us. I want people to see this, and I want people to see us in the US. So, show this and take it out there. So it was formative and very inspiring for me to actually become, for a short time, for 6 months, part of that media family. And I still hope to go back and visit when I go back.
I just wanted to ask about the Palestinian firefighter who was discussing wanting to plant trees, because I thought that there was as it was said, I went, like JNF, what is his context for understanding all of this history with the forest? So I don't want to continually bring the conversation back to trees, as we're not necessarily experts in arbor affairs, but do you have any idea what his thought was there? It was just a gift? Did he discuss it any further with you at any point?
As far as I know, it was a gesture. As far as I know.
Okay, we have one last question up here.
I just wonder if it's possible to buy a DVD of this movie or get.
Yes, it's available now. It just became available. Journeyman Pictures is the distributor that's carrying it. If you want to talk to me, I can give you information for how to get a DVD or a copy or other ways. And we're also, if anyone's interested in screening it for a community group or school, please be in touch. We can get you copies for community screenings, educational screenings. We want people to see the film. We want it to get out there. It's not going to be, it's not a big theatrical film. It's not going to be in your local. Other than thank you very much thanks to this festival here in the Cinema Village, but we really see the potential at the grassroots level for the film to get out there. So.
And when is the next screening of it as part of Other Israel?
It's showing Wednesday at 6:30 at the Cinema Village downtown. So please come.
I'll be very
come again, or rather tell your friends to come. And stop into your local fire. I mean, one of the things that I'll just close with this, if we're closing, that I actually found. One of the many things I found moving and inspiring about working on this project is this is the first time I really reached out to a firefighter. There was this community, it was an image, they were certainly growing up in the US, they were icons, but how do we get to them? Well, actually you know where they are. So sometimes there's just a matter of picking up the phone and going. So also in terms of the screenings in St. Louis, we did a small private preview screening and a local fire marshal came by. And so I actually see it as a way also to reach out to American and other firefighters who really respond to this positively. They see the value of their work in there. So I invite you to think of your firefighters and the work that they do in the community, and maybe they can be a part of this as well.
Guys, thank you so much for being here. Thank you for a wonderful film. One of the things I do like about this film is also its length. Many documentary filmmakers feel like it has to be an hour and a half long so it could get into the right kind of festivals. I think by making it shorter, it got into the right kind of festival that you can then have a long conversation afterwards.
So thank you very much for having us.
Thank you guys. Thank you all for joining us. Viola is up next here. Tomorrow we have many more films, including Right Down on an Arab and Invisible about the Bedouin community. So please join us for that and throughout the week. One more film that we haven't been mentioning a lot is Village of Peace about the African-American Hebrews living in Dimona. So check that one out when you're looking through our guide too. Thank you all.